Hello. The last final video I'm going to do on this book right here, Wetiko, Healing the Mind Virus That Plagues Our World by Paul Levy. Today is July the 5th. It is a beautiful rainy day out there today, and so I'm glad to be tucked away in the basement away from the rain. So I'll try and get through this as quick as I can. It's a lot of material. I'm going from chapter 10 to chapter 14. That's the last 4 chapters of the Bible. The last 4 chapters of the book. I got Bible on the brain because I was going through some references, both references that the author makes and some references that I added. So let's go quickly. Chapter 10 is called Other Lessons Helping Us to See Wetiko. So as I mentioned earlier, the author sees Wetiko everywhere. Wetiko is his term. It's an ancient indigenous term that he uses to describe evil. And he applies it to a lot of different things. He likes to use it as a term that is non-definable, but at the same time, in different spots in the book, he defines it in specific ways. He defines it as evil, he defines it as the devil, he defines it as a number of different things. So in chapter 10, he talks about Eckhart Tolle. I'm not sure how to pronounce Eckhart Tolle's name. The book, The Power of Now. I have read that book, and he says that in that book, he's talking about it. That is quite an interesting book, actually. I really enjoyed it. He talks about Carlos Castaneda, that he also talks about it. He talks about the author Don Miguel Ruiz. He wrote a book called The Four Agreements. He says that he also talks about it. And he even says that American politicians are now talking about Wetiko. He quotes Marianne Williamson and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, that they talk about dark psychic forces. So he's saying that when these politicians are talking about dark psychic forces that people have to fight against, they're actually talking about Wetiko as well. So again, the author sees Wetiko everywhere. He does provide in chapter 10 a good discussion on addiction, which I enjoyed, and it's a good eye-opener for someone that is susceptible to addiction. So that was good. Chapter 11 is called Scapegoating and How Darkness Hides in the Light. And he mentions page 220 a good quote. He said, "We are less good than we imagine ourselves to be." And he provides a sobering self-evaluation. So he's constantly reminding the reader that this Wetiko is inherent in every person, or is a part of every person. On page 223, he says, "Being unconscious of our own shadow compels us to incessantly try to improve other people, projecting our darker parts, resulting in misunderstanding and separation." And that's a good insight. So if we don't understand that we have a part of us that is part of the shadow, or we have a bad part in us, we're always trying to pick out the bad parts in other people. And this is a common thing, and he brings that to the attention of the reader. Chapter 12 is called René Girard's Take on Scapegoating in the Shadow. That's a very good chapter. He talks about scapegoating being the method used by Satan, and the other term for Satan, the accuser. When we are unaware that scapegoating is happening, we are all complicit in collectively perpetuating it. This is what he mentions that René Girard talks about. Page 39, projecting the shadow is the act that produces the very evil from which we are attempting to rid ourselves. So we're trying to get rid of evil, and so we look around us and we see evil in somebody else, and so we say, "Oh, I'm going to attack that person." And so we end up perpetuating the evil that we're trying to get rid of. So this is the overall theme of the book as well, is that we need to discover the shadow within ourselves before we can heal anything really. So this is an ongoing theme that he uses. And this gentleman that he quotes, René Girard, also does a lot of quoting of the Bible as well. So that was interesting for me. In talking about the biblical narrative, he says on page 42, God uses the violent death of his envoy as the occasion for a new and supreme revelation. He continues on, he says, God, out of his infinite love for us, allowed himself to be murdered in order to make the entire cycle of satanic violence that we are unconsciously participating in visible and conscious, and hence eventually inoperative. So by making that visible to us, right? And he goes on to continue, and this is a quote that he includes. He says, in the crucifixion, the darker powers, in silencing the one who was outing them, believed themselves to be victorious. But in their violent actions, they had unwittingly exposed and revealed themselves, and hence prepared their own grave. So that's the story, of course, of the crucifixion and the victory that it provided, right? So page 243, he says, to defeat the projection of our own darkness, so we're constantly projecting our own darkness on other people, is to realize that we are our own worst enemy, that we contain within ourselves what we are fighting against in the outside world. I thought that was a very powerful statement that he made. So we always projecting the darkness that we see, we project it on other people, and we say, oh, we have to scapegoat that group or scapegoat that person. They're the cause of all this evil, when we may actually be projecting our own faults, and that we don't realize that we contain within ourselves the evil that we're actually trying to fight against. So again, it's the ongoing theme. And so he really brings that all together in chapter 12. Then finally in chapter 13, he goes in and he talks about COVID-19. The title of the chapter is COVID-19, a symbol of a much deeper infection. And also chapter 14, the last chapter, is called The Coronavirus Contains Its Own Vaccine. So in those two chapters, he talks about how, in chapter 13, he talks about how there may be a bright side to the whole COVID-19 experience, that it may be allowing people to wake up to their own inner problems. And that chapter 14, talking about that it can be having a solution, a psychological solution, and not just a physical, biological solution contained within the circumstances that are happening, that we see over the past couple of years, right? And so I wanted to finish by just summarizing two things that I thought would be helpful to summarize the book. And the first is the scriptures that can be used to summarize what he's trying to say. In the chapter that he talked about the Kabbalah, the ancient mystic Jewish ideology that he summarizes in the first chapter, or first couple of chapters, you can use Isaiah 45 verse 7, where God is speaking and he says, I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. So in Isaiah, we have God being quoted as admitting that he creates evil, which is synonymous, which is what is mentioned in the Kabbalah. And so that covers that whole topic of where evil comes from. And then in Matthew 7, we're told, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye mete, it shall be measured to you again. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but consider not the beam that is in thy own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the mote out of your eye, when behold, a beam is in your own eye? That's from Matthew chapter 7, and that's essentially what he was talking about in chapters 12, 13, and mostly 11 and 12, where we're trying to get evil out of other people when we neglect that there is evil in our own perception or in ourselves. And so that's a summary of that, a much shorter summary. And of course, if you want an excellent summary, is Mark chapter 7. All of Mark chapter 7 is an extremely profound synopsis on the discovery, the interpretation, and the dealing with evil, if you want to call it that. And it's much shorter than having to go through, again, 300 pages of this, which is relatively tedious. I mean, it's written with hypnotic writing, so it's the cadence and the style of the delivery. If you want to read a good book on hypnotic writing, check out Malcolm Gladwell's book called Blink, and it tells you how people can be hypnotized through the written word. And in fact, it's actually a dangerous book because it was sponsored by Pepsi, and what it does is it hypnotizes the reader to drink Pepsi. So you have to be very careful and aware of that while you're watching the book. It's just a curious side note. After I read that book, I had to fight to not purchase Pepsi for the next several months because that's part of the promotion that's contained within the book, and it's actually very, very difficult to escape it. So you got to be aware that Paul Levy is using hypnotic writing to mesmerize the reader into maintaining an awareness of the evil that is within their own heart. So in that sense, it's a very therapeutic book because it forces you to be introspective. It forces you to continually double check your own motives, double check your own way of thinking, and to say, hey, wait a minute, am I the bad guy? Am I the one that needs to step back and say, I shouldn't be pointing the finger when the finger should be pointing back at me? So in that sense, very, very therapeutic, and I highly recommend it. But if you don't have time to spend on 300 pages, all you have to do, as I mentioned, is read Mark chapter 7, Matthew chapter 7, of course, Isaiah 45, verse 7, and I also included Ecclesiastes 12. It says, the words of the wise are as goads. That's like, well, as nails, right? And as nails fastened by the masters of assemblies, which are given from one shepherd. And further, by these, my son, this book is written to his son, right? Apparently written by Solomon. Be admonished, he says, of making many books there is no end, and of much study is a weariness of the flesh. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of mankind, of people, whole duty of people, right? Love one another is the commandment that we're given from the one shepherd. So that's a summary of it, right? You know, I could study books all day, all night. I love reading. I love studying books, but there's a certain element of futility in it that I realize. And, you know, I've heard people say, oh, you know, you've got your Bible, you've got your mythical book, they call it, and the atheists like to put it down and say, oh, it's this or it's that. But it's actually, you know, I hate to use the term the Bible. It's actually a collection of 66 different separate books. And it's so concise that it can actually save a huge amount of time and effort. Christ told us that his words were spirit, that they were life themselves. And so they're so condensed, they're so packed with information that you can save a huge amount of time. If I had only spent more time on Mark 7 and Matthew 7 and spent like maybe a couple of days studying them, I would be able to get as much insights out of reading 300 pages in this book. But if I hadn't read those 300 pages, I wouldn't have been able to appreciate the value of Matthew 7 and Mark chapter 7. So in that sense, it's still worthwhile, right? It is a weariness to the flesh, as Solomon said, and it is a little bit of futile, and there is no end of study. But you know, now that as I mentioned before, that I'm unable to exercise anymore because of my condition, that reading has taken on new meaning for me and new interest. But I also wanted to mention one last thing. That was the main thing I wanted to let you know. But I wanted to mention one last thing about this book, and that is this book is essentially dealing with intentional evil. In other words, it's talking about evil that is conscious, or evil that is your how do I say it clearly? Intentional evil versus unintentional evil. Think of it this way. It's talking about malicious, volitional evil, right? When you see something and you want to take action against it, you're upset about something, and then you strike out with your words or with your actions or with your deeds. And this is a common thing that we have to fight. Of course, we have to fight against it. We're instructed to turn the other cheek. We're instructed to love our enemies. In fact, it says that if we love our enemies, which is nobody is doing today, nobody's loving their enemies. Everybody is trying to point out their enemies and saying, this is why you're evil. The left is saying to the right, this is why you're evil. And the right is saying to the left, this is why you're evil. And that's an interesting conversation. In fact, a lot of times, from what I'm seeing, and I'm trying to be objective here, the right is exposing the left, saying, this is what you're saying. And then the left gets all upset and say, oh no, you're evil. And they don't have a real good explanation. They just blurt it out. And I've been watching that happen more often lately. And so obviously, as a right-leaning conservative, obviously, I tend towards that side. And I say, well, wait a minute. If there actually is evil existing somewhere, what action can be taken? What can we do? We're obligated to speak up when we see it. As Alexander Solzhenitsyn taught us, he said, you're obligated to speak up if you see evil and lies. I made a lie today online. I posted a tweet and I said that so-and-so said this. And I said, I'm actually lying, but it's a sarcastic fun lie. I'm not trying to damage anybody. I'm just trying to get people to think. But there's different kinds of lies, right? There's lies that are malicious, volitional lies, and there are lies that are trying to make a joke, right? But getting back to that idea of intentional versus unintentional, this book is talking about intentional evil. It doesn't talk about unconscious evil. What about the situations where there is evil caused or pain caused that is not intentional? In other words, what happens when somebody says something and they accidentally hurt somebody else, but they have no conscious awareness of it? They hurt somebody unintentionally, and what is the cure for that? Or what you could call it innocent pain or innocent evil. This book doesn't address the concept of innocent evil. What happens when people are subject to evil, but there is no human source for it? They are exposed to an accident, or they are born in a bad state, so to speak. I see people that are part of a local care facility, and they have people there that are permanently incapacitated, and they've been born incapacitated, and some of them have full conscious awareness. So they know that they are incapacitated. They have a full functioning mind, just as you or I do. They can communicate, but they're unable to communicate the way you or I can because of their physical infirmity and that they were born with. And it's interesting. There's a story, if you want to check this out. John chapter 9 is dealing with this exact topic, which is not covered in the book Wetiko. John chapter 9 is the story of a guy that was born blind, and you probably heard it before, where the apostles come to the teacher and say, where did this evil come from? Is this guy sinning, and that's why he's getting this karma? So he sinned, and so he's had this bad thing happen to him. He's born blind, so it's his own fault from his own whatever. Or did his parents do something evil, so that the evil that his parents did is being passed down to this next generation? And the answer was neither of those, right? He said neither of those reasons are the reasons for the evil that you see, or the pain that you see, or the evil that is manifesting itself in this particular person. He said that the reason is that so that the purpose or the glory of God, the working of God, could be made manifest in this person's life. And then he went on to heal this guy, and if you continue on the story, that one chapter alone is extremely, extremely powerful. That's John chapter 9. That he gets healed, and then he goes, and these other people see him and say, "Hey, what happened to you? And is this really the guy? Did you really get healed?" And he goes on this big story that happens afterwards. But the actual event itself is extremely important, because the teacher is explaining to us that not all evil has a human source, and not all evil can be traced back to the responsibility of human activity, so to speak. And so when you see evil, quote, evil that occurs, sometimes it can be evil that happened, and somebody said something that really hurt you when you were young, and if you were to talk to them about it, they say they have no memory of it. I didn't know I said that. Or they'll say, that wasn't me, or something, or it's such a long time ago. And that's very common. People have been hurt tremendously by the words of other people, and that person has no awareness of it. That's one type, a kind of unconscious evil. And the other type is actually a completely innocent evil, where somebody, was struck by lightning, so to speak. They had something horrible happen, and they became paralyzed just by an accident. Maybe they fell into a swimming pool. You've heard that happen, and they dove in and they cracked their neck, and then they're permanently paralyzed, and then they have to deal with that for the rest of their lives. And then someone would ask the question, well, how is that type of evil explainable? And the only answer that we're given is from John chapter 9, that saying that the works of God should be made manifest in that person. And so the only way that situation can be reconciled is in light of eternity. There has to be a reconciliation after we leave this earth. For those people, imagine those people that are permanently incapacitated, they're in a wheelchair, they know that other people are forced to take care of them for their entire lives. They can't speak, they can't control themselves, they can't control their body. They're trapped in a body that is essentially dead, but they are able to continue living, being fed and breathing and living, and eventually they pass on, maybe at a young age because of the situation that they're in. They might live to 20 or 30, and then they pass away. Well, these people that are absolutely and completely innocent, could you imagine the reconciliation that must happen when they leave this earth, and that they are exposed to their Creator, to finally understand and to finally experience victory from the pain, the evil, the horrific situation that they faced. I even can't help but think about that we've heard this before, the situation of thalidomide, right? Where women wanted to prevent feeling sick. They went to their doctor. They said, take this pill and it'll help take care of your sickness. But they didn't realize, right, that they were carrying a baby, and the babies were born without limbs, right? They were born with no arms. Can you imagine being that person that was born with no arms? You're innocent. Your mom was innocent. They didn't know. The doctor was innocent. They didn't know. Somebody that produced that drug was innocent. They were trying to make something useful. Maybe there was some maliciousness along the way, but even if there wasn't, I'm assuming that let's say hypothetically there was absolutely no maliciousness anywhere in that chain of events. It happened, and that there's nothing we can say or do about it. This guy that they met in John chapter 9, the guy was born blind. We don't know why. Some genetic situation happened. And they said, what? And they said, where did this evil come from? How did this happen? This is not explained by the theory of Wetiko, right? That Paul Levy talks about. It's unexplainable in his synopsis of evil, in his evaluation of evil. All his evaluations are dealing with human behavior, whereas this type of evil is a part of the human condition. It's part of what we've been born into. We've been born into this world which is a broken world, a fragile world, which is a world that is prone to evil, and we experience it, but then we move on to what they always call a better place, right? And if you talk to people that have had these death experiences where they've seen glimpses of the afterlife, they often say about how blissful it is, how there is no more pain, of how these colors and the smells and everything is totally different and totally superior to what it is here, that they don't want to come back to their body. And that covers all religious backgrounds. There's atheists that have experienced that. They've gone and passed on through their heart stopping for 2, 3, 5 minutes, and they've experienced this afterlife, and they say, wow, it's just so amazing that it takes away any fear of death from them forever. And I could go on in more detail, but you can see those yourself. You can find a lot of them. I mean, sometimes it's a horrific experience. Hopefully it's not. But a lot of times it's this meeting with a powerful, loving God who cares about his creation and makes all things make sense. We're told in the Revelation that all tears will be wiped away, right? That the memory of earth itself will one day pass away. Imagine, how is that possible? So the only way to reconcile evil that we experience in this world is by bringing it into context with eternity. With no eternity, there is no meaning. With no spiritual realm, there is no meaning. And this is what has, again, I've talked about this before, is that this is what has been perpetrated by atheism. And it's no wonder, because there was such a huge amount of failure during the 80s and 90s, if you're not familiar, when evangelical Christianity was flourishing, one type of spirituality that was flourishing in North America. There were all these human failures that began to happen. The televangelist scandals, all these Christians failing and making mistakes, and people realizing, well, they're just like everybody else. They're just subject to the same law of the flesh as everybody else. So why should we believe? And this probably precipitated or contributed towards a large influx of the influence of atheism in Western society. And so it is firmly taken root, and now it is the de facto standard in academic circles, for example, to if you want to study something like psychology, over 90% of the instructors and students would be atheists or adhere to atheist ideals. And so if that is the case, if atheism is the foundation for society today, then there is no afterlife. There is no ability to reconcile the evil that we see in all cases and in all circumstances. Do you see what I'm saying? The only way they can reconcile evil is by pointing to a group that they don't like and saying, those are the wicked ones. Those are the wicked ones. The left is saying it about the right. The right is saying it about the left. This group is saying it about that group. One religion is saying it about another religion. Some religions consider Christians to be idol worshippers. They say, oh, these people don't deserve to live. Some other religions say Christians are this, so they don't deserve to live. And then Christians are saying, oh, this group don't believe the way they're supposed to, so they don't deserve to live. And so it can be very violent thoughts, very violent ways of thinking that can be detrimental to the entire human community. And the only way to have any type of hope at camaraderie, at any type of hope at inter-ideological peace or inter-community peace amongst different groups is with a understanding that there is an eternity, that there is a loving God that loves his entire creation, that loves nature, that loves people, that loves community, that loves everybody. And even with all our foibles and all our idiosyncrasies, that God loves each and every one of us the same. And if we get a realization of that in our heart, then we can start to say, oh, I have to heal myself first. Then we can start to adopt some of these principles that Paul Levy is talking about. We can start to be introspective, which is the scripture that says, look at the speck and look at the beam in your own eye. Don't look in the speck in your neighbor's eye, because really we can only see a speck when we're judging somebody else. We can only see a small speck, whereas when we look at ourselves, we can see all our huge problems because they're right in front of us, right? Only we know ourselves better than anybody else. And so only we know how much struggle we have to go before we can claim any type of self-healing, if we ever do reach that point, because it's a never-ending process, right? No wonder the apostle said that he dies daily. So every day we have to die to self. Every day we have a new challenge where we have to lay down our preference for somebody else. And to see an example that was set for us that is so far beyond what we could ever imagine is mind-blowing, right? I think if anybody reads that John chapter 9 alone, that one chapter alone can save a person's heart. And when I use the word save, I mean it in the sense of totally breaking down a person's defenses against and towards God and saying, oh God, have mercy on me. Open my eyes, right? Deliver me from my own blindness. That one chapter alone. So if you want to spend 300 pages on a wonderful therapeutic book that'll get you to really be self-introspective, that's not a bad read. It's worthwhile. But if you want to save yourself a lot of time, all you got to do is read John chapter 9, Mark chapter 7, Matthew chapter 7, and you're done. And it'll transform your heart and your mind. But you got to read it with the right context, right? You got to be able to apply those spiritual words that are so powerful. You can just read them and boom, you can forget about them, right? It's like he said that seed gets planted, that word gets planted, and what happens? The worries of the world, the deceitfulness of riches, they choke it out. And so you become deaf to it. You don't hear it. You've heard that story many different times. Oh, why do you look at the speck in your neighbor's eye when there's a beam in you? You've heard that many, many times, but it just goes in and out, right? Unless you really take it to heart and ask God for his what? For his Holy Spirit to deliver us and allow us to allow that word to take root in our heart and mind. And then what does it say? It produces some tenfold, some 20-fold, some 100-fold return in terms of life and spiritual growth and revelation, right? It can take root in our hearts. But a lot of times we just let it go and we think, oh, that's from that mythical book, the Bible. That was written a long time ago and it's got all these contradictions and I don't believe in the Bible. And don't talk to me about your Bible because I don't want anything to do with it. You know, blah, 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 blah. They block their ears and they don't want to hear it. And you're going to have people that feel that way, and that's normal. But man, there's a lot of power in those words. There is a lot of power in those words. Don't forget, Christ said, my words are spirit and they are life. And this is what I'm interested in. I don't know how much life I have left on this earth, but I want to experience life both here, now, and in eternity. And I hope you do too. So I thank you so much for watching. God bless you. I love you. I got a little preachy there, but it felt good, right? It felt right. It's like, wow, this guy's talking about the Bible, and he's New Age, right? That's what happens if you show this to a Christian. What will they say? New Age. Oh, that's scary. I can't read that. You can't look at that. It talks about New Age stuff in there. That's dangerous, right? Well, I haven't found a book yet that I'm afraid of, so I'm not scared to read what people have to offer. I might not like it. I might chuck it after I'm done, but I'll at least try and get through it and read it. So thank you so much for watching. God bless you. I love you very much. I hope you have a fantastic day. Enjoy this beautiful rainy day that's causing all the crops to grow, causing the garden to grow. And I think I'm going to sit out, have a coffee, and listen to the rain come down on the back porch. Take care of yourself. Have a wonderful day. God bless you. Thank you for watching. Take care now. Bye-bye. Bye.